Hi, I'm Paul Moore, Director of Nursing for Manx Care. Measles is a virus and it spreads very easily. In fact, the World Health Organization say it's one of the world's most contagious diseases. It's transmitted through the respiratory route, so it's airborne or droplet transmission, or by direct contact with nasal or throat secretions of infected people, so they might sneeze on you or you may kiss them. It has an incubation period for between 10 and 12 days from exposure to the onset of symptoms, but that can vary from between 7 and 21 days, so around about a month. The infectious period is 4 days before the onset of the rash and 4 days after. Measles can be harmful. It can lead to serious problems if it spreads to other parts of the body, such as the lungs or the brain, and can cause miscarriage, stillbirth or premature birth to pregnant women who catch measles while they're pregnant.
What are some of the symptoms that measles presents in people?
The symptoms of measles mimic those of a common cold in the early stages of the disease. So it's classically a high temperature, a runny nose or blocked nose, sneezing, a cough. In some cases you might get red, sore, watery eyes that can often stick together, particularly young kids. Sometimes you might get small white bluish spots that may appear inside the cheeks, on the tongue, inside the lips, in the mouth. And these spots usually last a few days, but they may give a clear indication that we're dealing with measles. And a rash usually appears a few days after the cold-like symptoms. Now, the rash starts on the face, usually, or behind the ears, before it spreads to the rest of the body. So if you see it on the face and the head first, there might be a sign that the rash you're dealing with is measles. The spots of the measles rash are sometimes raised so they can feel like sandpaper, and they sometimes join together to form blotchy patches of rash. They're not usually itchy. The rash looks brown or red on white skin, but it can be harder to detect on brown or black skin.
Why exactly are we having this conversation today? What is the issue, particularly in the UK, that's prompting these conversations?
There's been a rise in measles cases in England in 2023, particularly in the West Midlands area, London, and more recently cases appearing in the northwest of England. And globally, activity around measles has been increasing since about 2022, and there are large outbreaks underway in parts of South Asia and Africa. And in some of those areas, measles is endemic. During the COVID pandemic, the vaccine uptake rates fell right across the world, and in particular, the coverage for measles, mumps and rubella vaccine has fallen too. And in February 2022, the World Health Organization in Europe called for urgent action in all countries to catch up children and adults who missed their MMR vaccine doses in order to prevent a resurgence of measles. Now, on the Isle of Man, as I'm here today, there are no cases of measles currently on the Isle of Man, but there is a risk. About 23% of the children under 5 on the Isle of Man are not yet vaccinated against measles, mumps and rubella. And we're contacting those parents who've not had their children vaccinated, inviting them to take up the offer of a measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, as this is the best way to prevent getting the disease. We're also contacting those children and young people in the 5 to 25 age group who have also not had their vaccination, as this could also represent a vulnerable group of people. And just to reiterate, vaccination is the best form of defence against measles and is the single biggest, most important intervention we can do to stop this disease from spreading if it were to arrive on the Isle of Man.
And you mentioned that the uptake of vaccines in general since the COVID pandemic has gone down. How do you as Manx Care actually tackle that vaccine hesitancy?
I want to recognise that there are some people who are not persuaded by vaccinations and have concerns. And I think some of those concerns are legitimate. It's very important we don't dismiss that and we understand and work with people who are not sure about the efficacy or safety of vaccines. But we are making contact with those people that we know on our records haven't had the MMR vaccine, and we'll be inviting them to come forward to have that vaccine done again. It can be a very useful intervention at minimising the risk of measles outbreak, but also containing it if it were to spread. We saw that following the outbreak in 2012 and 2013, where a spirited MMR campaign made a huge impact on the spread of measles and brought the rates right down for best part of a decade. That's probably what we'll need to do again, just to make sure that we minimise the risk for people on the Isle of Man.
What happens if we do start to see cases of measles here on the island? What would be the step for Manx Care to take then?
First and foremost, I think the most important thing is the people who are dealing with the children, or if it's you that you think you have measles, the first thing to do, if you suspect that you have measles, is to contact your general practitioner by telephone and let them know in advance the symptoms that you have so they can prepare for your arrival. Given this is one of the most contagious diseases known to human beings, it's very important that we don't allow you to just sit in the waiting room with everybody else. Special arrangements will need to be made to make sure that we can examine you or your child, carry out the relevant tests, and then determine the most appropriate plan for you depending on your condition. So just to reiterate, contact your GP by telephone first, and they'll make arrangements to see you.
It is important to get that diagnosis as well, isn't it?
Well, it's absolutely essential to have that diagnosis, actually, because we're dealing with signs and symptoms that mimic the common cold. There's a good chance you might have the common cold as opposed to measles. And sometimes rashes are very common. But it's very important to make sure that if you suspect you've got a rash, it starts on the face, spreads to the rest of the body, feels like sandpaper, you've got spots in your mouth. It's very important to get that rash diagnosed, and if it's measles, you get the most appropriate advice and treatment as required.
How can people check if they are fully vaccinated, or if they've only had, say, one dose or no doses? How are people able to check that?
If you're not sure if you're covered for measles, you can make contact with your general practitioner and they can do a check on your records. And if you've had the vaccine, it will be mentioned. In most cases, it will be mentioned on your records if you've had that vaccine here on the Isle of Man. If you're not sure and you want to talk to a practitioner about whether it be appropriate for you to have a vaccine, make an appointment, go and talk to someone who can work it through. And if it's right for you, we can offer the vaccine.
And the vaccine is, at the moment, offered the first dose to a 1-year-old and the second dose to, I think it's a 3.5-year-old. But it is important to stress as well that they can be had at any age. It doesn't have to be, it's not a case of if you haven't had it at those ages, you've missed your opportunity.
Absolutely not. So particularly if you're under 5 and under 25, or you are a woman of childbearing age, if you feel as though the vaccine would be useful, I'd like to come forward and talk that through with the practitioner. If you've not had the vaccine and you want an opportunity to have that vaccine, I'd like to come forward and discuss that with your GP, because it might be absolutely right for you. And there may be some people who, for whatever reason, chose not to have the vaccine when it was made available to them, but may have changed their mind since then. And you can come forward and we can discuss that with you. And if the vaccine is right, we can offer you the vaccine as well.
You talked about the figures of vaccine uptake here, particularly in the under-5s. How concerned is Manx Care about a potential outbreak here on the island? Is it something that is a real concern at the moment?
Well, I think when you look at the evidence in England, and we know that measles is one of the most contagious diseases known to human beings, given the levels of vaccine uptake, there is a risk that if measles were to arrive on the Isle of Man, that it may spread. And as I said before, it can, for some people, be a very serious condition. If that were to happen, there's some very important things that need to kick in. If you think you or your child has measles, I want to stress that you must stay away from nurseries, schools and work for at least 4 days from when the rash first appears. That's essential in minimising the spread of measles and contact with other vulnerable people. And it's also important to avoid close contact with babies or anyone who is pregnant or has a weakened immune system. These are also classed as vulnerable people, and it may be easy for them to acquire the disease. And for those people, it could have very significant implications. So if you think you've got measles, you need to self-isolate.
What do you do then if your child or you become very sick as a result of the measles?
So the things to look out for the signs of serious illness will be if you or your child has measles and you've had a seizure or a fit, you're struggling to breathe, and that might be a sign that you're gasping, you're choking, you're not able to speak in full sentences, so you can't get your words out without having to take a breath. Or in babies, it may look like they're grunting, they're making grunting noises, or their stomachs look like they're being sucked in when they're breathing. They're unable to stay awake, can't keep their eyes open for more than a few seconds. You become confused, and it's a sudden confusion. Your child may be unsettled, behaving differently, or crying non-stop. If your child is limp, floppy, or not responding normally, their head may fall to the side, backwards or forwards, or they may find it difficult to lift their head up and focus on your face. A rash that does not fade when you press a glass to it, or a stiff neck, or you find light uncomfortable, it starts to hurt when you open the curtains or you turn the light on. All those are signs of serious illness. And in those circumstances, if any of those are present, you need to ring 999 or go to A&E.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.